is our great pleasure to have Terry McMaster with us. He researches Revolutionary War in the greater Mohawk Valley. And interestingly for me, his ancestors were part of this story. They were living in the Cherry Valley when the settlement was destroyed, 1778. And your ancestor, David McMaster, led 6th Company, 3rd Regiment, the Tryon County Militia, fought at Oriskany, Battle of Saratoga, and more. Independent historian, president of the Van Alstyne Homestead, what year is that house?
It was started in 1729.
It's a cool little building. I want to go there.
Building.
Board member of the Cherry Valley Historical Association. Join me in giving a hand to our speaker for today, Terry McMaster.
It's nice to be here again. I've done two or three presentations here before. And I'm actually from Utica originally, but I moved all over the place, and I was in Syracuse area for like 25 years, and then I moved down to near Albany. So it's great being in the Capital District, but I really miss the Mohawk Valley. So I come up here a lot. So let's see. Oh, I should put my hat on. Okay. I just want to mention that my friend Scott Pratt is here with some really cool reproduction Revolutionary War stuff. He's done reenacting and all that kind of thing for like 30 years. And I have my greeting cards here on this table. Some are historical and some are artsy. So let me see how this works. Okay. So that Morrison, not that Morrison. So I'm dedicating my talk to the revolutionaries of the Mohawk Valley and the committee members, Samuel Ludlow Fry, who you'll find out about, and Marilee Penrose, and my good friend Jim Morrison. Jim Morrison was the guy to go to if you wanted to know something about the Revolutionary War in the Mohawk Valley. The soldiers, the militia, I would say, Jim, have you ever heard of this guy? Oh yeah, he was on the 3rd Regiment, 4th Company. He's buried, over in Johnstown. And he just knew everything. And he did wonderful books, which I don't know if you guys carry them here. He did a series of books called, I don't know what they're called. I'll think of it later. He did books with a lady named Joyce somebody, and they're all pension applications, all excerpts from pension applications from the Revolutionary War, and you can just literally read the whole book straight through. It's so wonderful. Anyway, Jim died about 2 years ago this month, and so I wanted to dedicate this to him. So I want to thank Judy Wellman, who really turned me on to history at Oswego College. Marjorie Hinman, you probably don't know who she is. She wrote a wonderful book called Onondaga, Hub of the Border War during the American Revolution. She was from Windsor down the Susquehanna a ways. I want to thank my parents and public school teachers for starving me of real history and family history, which is part of the reason why I'm so enthusiastic about it. Once I discovered what real history is, like social history about real people, not just about some king and some war and stuff. That was when I was a senior in college at Oswego, 1974. And then the Van Alstyne Homestead. If you haven't been there, I really recommend you come and see us. I was asked to do a couple talks there, and then I was asked to be on the board, and then I ended up being the vice president which I thought, well, this is great because I don't have to do anything. I can just study history and give talks. And then like 6 months later, the president decided to resign. So now I'm the president. What a pain. But I love it. I love being involved in that place. So a lot of the Tryon County Committee of Safety meetings were held at the Van Alstyne homestead. It was started about 1729 and added on to, so it was an important place. So when it's so ironic that I'm there, because when I'm there in the house, in the old tavern, which is still there, which is where they had the meetings, I'm thinking my ancestor was in this room. A couple of them, actually. So Cherry Valley Museum, Fort Plain Museum, Schenectady Historical, this place, Old Fort Johnson, New York State Library, Sydney Historical Society, I should mention. I have a friend who is also here with a couple other friends who are from Sydney. They drove up here just for this talk. And that's a really wonderful place. Okay, so this is what we're going to look at today. Trying to figure out what was Tryon County? Where was it? What was it? How big was it? How the Committee of Safety came into being. The sources, let's see, there's a little pointer. The sources, these are the two main sources that I took this stuff from. S.L. Fry and Mary Penrose's books. So who was on the committee? Where did they meet? From whom did they get their authority? They didn't just start up on their own authority. What's the connection with the Van Alstyne homestead? And how did I get mixed up in all this? So Tryon County was created in 1772, and it was changed to Montgomery County in 1784 after the war, because Governor Tryon was a loyalist. So as soon as the revolutionary folks could, they changed the name. And you know who Montgomery County is named after? No? You don't? Okay. There's going to be a quiz later. Scott, you know. Richard Montgomery, who is one of the, he's kind of I don't know, like sort of larger than life guy. He was the general in charge of the Quebec expedition in 1775. Really, really cool guy, like just really gung-ho, great leader. I think he was originally from Ireland, as many of us are. And he got killed, like, at the Battle of Quebec, like in the first 5 minutes. So almost nobody's heard of him, but he would have been, he probably would have been president one day, or, doing something important. So Tryon County, it was this whole big section right here, where the green line is and then where the red line is. It was a huge territory. So March 24th, so literally like 254 years ago today, 4 days before today, is when it was created. 8 million acres stretching from the St. Lawrence to PA and from just west of Schenectady to the Fort Stanwix Treaty Line, which is here, and then with a jog over to Oswego and this whole northern territory. So it was a huge amount of land, and that had all been Albany County at one time. So they chopped off this big chunk from Albany County and made it Tryon County. Country of the Six Nations. Okay, so who was the person most responsible for creating it? This is going to be a kind of a back and forth. I'm going to ask you guys some questions, see what you know.
Was it Johnson? Johnson?
Yeah. Sir William Johnson.
Sir William Johnson.
Sir William Johnson, who was the superintendent of Indian Affairs during the French and Indian War, or maybe like towards the end of it, and then until he died. And he was like the biggest of the big shots of the Mohawk Valley. Nothing happened in the Mohawk Valley without his approval. Old Fort Johnson near Amsterdam is a wonderful place to visit. That was his second to last mansion. And then Johnson Hall in Johnstown is the last place he lived. Those are really worth a visit. So Johnstown was originally John's Town, named after his son. So Johnstown became the county seat. This is my favorite map of all the maps I've ever found. This is from Francis Halsey's book, The Old New York Frontier. And it's nice because it shows the old settlements, and it also shows you where the current counties are placed over the old map. And the reason, well, there's maybe more than one reason, but the main reason that I love this map so much is because it lists this little place called the Johnston Settlement, which is now where Sydney is. And the Johnston Settlement was founded by my ancestor, who was friends with James McMaster, and their kids married each other. So the Johnston Settlement was only there for 5 years. He founded it with a few families at the confluence of the Unadilla River and the Susquehanna. So right there. It only lasted for 5 years because Joseph Brant came by and drove them out, unless they were for the king, in which they could stay. So Joseph Brant and I have a long history of, well, he's probably not that interested in me, but I'm very interested in him. Because my ancestor, Reverend Johnson, talked to Joseph Brant a couple of times. And of course, it didn't go that well for my ancestor. So, so Judy Wellman, this is the class I took, Seminar in Local and Regional History at Oswego. I had like an elective, and a friend of mine said, oh, you should take this class. It was like completely, like, I don't even know how that happened, but I took the class and it just totally blew my mind, and I started finding out about the real people of upstate New York and the colonial period, including my family. And my Aunt Dorothy, my dad knew nothing about history. I mean, didn't care anything about it. Well, he was in World War II, so he was kind of interested in the history of World War II, but not really. And my mom knew almost nothing about her family, so I was just starved. What families do I come from? I just had to find out all this stuff. So those two in particular really helped me get going on family history and Mohawk Valley history. So Samuel Ludlow Fry published this book, Minute Book. Do you guys know this book? Some of you know it. It's a classic. It's a beautiful old book. It's got this really cool brown kind of cloth cover. Minute Book of the Committee of Safety of Tryon County, the Old New York Frontier. And it was done by Montgomery County Historical Society, which is located at Old Fort Johnson, like I was telling you about before. So I had this book for years and years, and I only just skimmed through it. Really hadn't read it very closely. But about 6 months ago, when I decided to do this talk, I thought, I have to actually read this book, because I realized that the Committee of Safety is at the ground level of everything that happened here in this area in the Revolutionary War period. They were the founders of the revolution in the Mohawk Valley. So This is the place where the first meeting happened. Lux's Tavern, or in the book it says Lux's home. Adam Lux was on, he wasn't even on the committee. So Palatine, I'm going to show you where the districts were, and they're very similar today, the districts of old Tryon County. So August 27, 1974, these guys were already getting together saying, we have to do something about the British oppression, the taxes, the harassment, all that kind of thing. So he had in his possession some of the original manuscripts of the minutes of the Committee of Safety. And he published his book, but it only covered this period, 24 August to 24 November, 74 to 75. So it only published that amount of minutes. And at first, I didn't know how long the minutes had gone on for. I didn't really know anything about the Committee of Safety, except I used to come across the name all the time because they were always involved in everything. And so it's really a lovely book. It has a great preface by this guy, J. Howard Hansen. And so a couple of the quotes from his book. Side by side with the white population of Holland Dutch, Palatine German, and Scots Irish were the Mohawks and Oneidas. And then he says, the war of pen and petition preceded the actual battle at arms. And then he says, it is a matter of much regret that the last pages of the manuscript are apparently lost forever. But they really weren't lost forever. They were lost to him. So Samuel Ludlow Fry was the grandson of John Fry, who was a committee member, and towards the end was the chairman of the Committee of Safety. So Captain or Major John Fry had collected all of these minutes and kept them, thank God, kept them safe. And so this is what happened. Do you know who this is? I know this is a hard question. William W. Campbell, who wrote Annals of Tryon County. And so this is the connection to Campbell. And I only found out about this. I have Marilee Penrose's book with me, which is all the minutes. And I wondered, why does Fry's book only have this amount of minutes? What happened to the rest of them? And then when I discovered her, I learned what had happened. So this is what happened. Campbell had borrowed a bunch of the minutes from November 75 to April 78 when he was writing his book, Annals of Tryon County. So his book was published in 1831, and John Fry, the original owner of the minutes, died in 1833. And 6 years later, instead of Campbell giving the minutes back to the Fry family, he gave them to the New York Historical Society, because he lived in New York City. He was a Cherry Valley guy. And so Marilee Penrose, who I know almost nothing about her, but I have several of her books, and they're I think she was the first person to really start looking closely at the original documents of the Revolutionary War in the Mohawk Valley and in other stuff. So she published this book in 78. That's what the title page looks like. So she explains how the minutes had gotten lost and had gotten separated. She also explains the districts, how the districts were set up. So there's some discrepancy about some of the boundaries of the districts, but it doesn't really matter for our talk today. So this is a kind of a drawing of the middle part of Tryon County where the districts were. So the Mohawk district was at the eastern side of Tryon County. See, here's Schenectady. So this is Albany County. So this line was drawn like this down. So the Mohawk district was this section here. This is where my ancestors lived, in this little section here, near Fort Hunter. And then you had the Palatine district up here above the river and the Canajoharie district below the river, and that's where Cherry Valley is. So it was like the Canajoharie, Cherry Valley area. And then you got German Flats here, and that's where like Fort Herkimer was, Old Fort Schuyler, which was here in Utica, Oriskany Battlefield. So this is German Flats, and it's still called German Flats today. And then the Kingsland district, which I knew the least about, is up here, above German Flats. And that's where Herkimer is. So Governor Tryon was, well, this is the kind of the nuts and bolts on him. British Army officer, colonial administrator. He was a governor of North Carolina for a while, and then they kicked him up here and he became the governor here for a while. And of course, he was run out by the revolutionary governments that were forming in New York. And he's known for his cruelty and high taxation. Gee, that sounds familiar. So what led up to, I kept thinking, well, what led up to the Committee of Safeties being formed? Like, what was happening that led up? They didn't just appear out of thin air. So you have the Boston Massacre, 1770, the Boston Tea Party, 1773. The Boston Port Act was imposed by the British to punish Boston for the Boston Tea Party because they had destroyed like thousands of dollars of tea that wasn't theirs. So Sam Adams, have you heard of him? Not the beer, the guy. Sam Adams, he was one of the top revolutionary thinkers in Boston in the early days. I mean, he was ready for revolution like by 1770. I don't know a lot about him yet, but he's the one that started saying, we have to organize, we have to have committees of correspondence, meaning you get together with the people, with your neighbors, and you figure out how to protest the British and what they were doing and how to resist what they're doing. And then they would write letters to everybody else, all the other committees, to share what they were doing and get support from them. So I discovered that there's the Journals of the Provincial Congress of New York, which is like not easy reading, not good reading at all. And I found that there's 2 volumes. I haven't really read much of the first volume. That's the minutes. And then the second volume is the letters that were being sent back and forth. And I only just barely dipped into them because I couldn't get that far off track. But anyway, the Provincial Congress was essentially the new government of New York. And then the committees of safety and correspondence in the counties of New York were all looking to them for guidance and support. The Fort Stanwix Treaty Line, again, is an important thing. It was also drawn up under William Johnson's supervision at Fort Stanwix. That's why they call it that. And the treaty line separated white territory from Indian territory. And because settlers tended to go on Indian land without permission and sometimes live there and, take advantage of the fact that the Indians had these huge amounts of land that they weren't on all the time. So this is from Marjorie Hinman's book. If you love Revolutionary War stuff in this area, in upstate New York and the upper Susquehanna, I recommend you read her book. So the first meeting was at Lux's Tavern or Lux's house, and these are the guys that were elected to be members of the Palatine Committee. It was very small. It was 4 people at first. And for some reason, Palatine got on board before anybody else. So you've heard of Stone Arabia, probably. So the Palatine, what? Yeah. Do you know why it's called Stone Arabia? Yeah, right. Yeah. Stone Arabia is an important place. You know, I know that this is kind of like upper Mohawk Valley, and that's middle Mohawk Valley. But anyway, so these are the guys that were first elected. So there had to have been gatherings that we don't have any minutes for and we don't have any documentation for. Because these guys were elected by a bunch of the people that lived in that area, in the Palatine district. Okay, so because this is minutes of the Tryon County Committee of Safety, there's lots of text, and so there's going to be some reading. I want to give you the real nuts and bolts of what they did the very first meeting, like which started the whole process. So, whereas the British Parliament has lately passed an act for raising a revenue in America without the consent of our representative, abridging the liberties and privileges of the American colonies and blocking up the port of Boston. The freeholders and inhabitants of Palatine District, looking with concern and heartful sorrow on these alarming and calamitous conditions, do meet this day on that purpose at the house of Adam Lux, Esquire, and concluded the resolves. So these are the resolves, and there's 8 of them. It's kind of a lot of stuff. So these guys weren't revolutionaries yet. They were just protesting. The first is that King George III is lawful and rightful, that we will, with our lives and fortune, support and maintain him on the throne. That we think it is our greatest happiness to be governed by the laws of Great Britain. Great Britain was one of the most liberal of the monarchies of the old world. He wasn't so much an absolute monarch the way the French king was or the Spanish king, because they had a parliament. So it was a parliamentary monarchy, I guess they call it. That we think it is our undeniable privilege to be taxed only with our own consent given by ourselves. So it was really the taxes that they protested, and also the Port of Boston being blocked up. That the act for blocking up the Port of Boston is oppressive and arbitrary, injurious in its principles, and oppressive to the inhabitants of Boston, who we consider as brethren. I love that word. That's almost never used anymore. Suffering in the common cause. That we will unite and join with the different districts of this county in giving whatever relief to the poor, distressed inhabitants of Boston, and that we will join with our brethren of the rest of this colony in anything tending to support and defend our rights and liberties. So they weren't ready to say liberty or death at this point. 6, that we think the sending of delegates from the colonies to a Continental Congress is absolutely necessary at this alarming crisis, and approve of the 5 gentlemen chose delegates for this colony by our brethren of New York, hereby choosing the same persons. So yeah, you chose them, yeah, we choose them too. That we hereby engage faithfully to abide by and adhere to such restrictions and regulations as shall be made by said Congress, that we conceive it necessary that there be appointed a standing committee of this county to correspond with the committees of New York and Albany, and we do hereby appoint, and that's when they appointed these guys, the first 4 members of the Palatine Committee, who together with persons to be appointed by the other districts of this county shall compose a committee of correspondence, etc. So, and then it is voted that by this committee, or by this meeting, that copies of the proceedings be, made and transmitted so other people know what they're doing. So Palatine District had the first 4 meetings. It wasn't really the Tryon County Committee of Safety yet. It was just the Palatine District who were out in front of this whole thing. So there's the dates of the first 4. They started in August 74. Then the next thing, it's May of 75. And of course, these guys weren't used to writing minutes and being that organized. So the second meeting, they didn't put the date and they didn't put the place where they were meeting. The third is May 19th, but no place listed, and the fourth is May 21st and at the home of Philip W. Fox. So those are the first 4 meetings. And so this is the Palatine District. You know where the noses are in along the river? That's where Canajoharie District started. And that goes back hundreds of years too. The Mohawks basically envisioned that the Canajoharie area, they didn't call it a district, started at the noses and went to Little Falls. I believe that's what it was. So that's the first 4 meetings. So how is it that the first meeting took place in August 74? I know this is actually kind of a tricky question too, a hard question. What do you know of that happened just before this, like maybe a month earlier, that allowed these guys to start having these secret meetings, like really forming a secret government, although they didn't see it? William Johnson died. William Johnson, who controlled everything in the Mohawk Valley as much as he could. He died in July of 74. A month later, these guys can now safely meet because, he's not looking over everybody's shoulder. So the New York Provincial Congress started up. This stuff didn't all happen at the same time. Like sometimes things happen before other things that you would think, wait, it should be the other way around. But the Provincial Congress in New York City was essentially the new revolutionary government. They didn't even really call it revolutionary. They were trying to figure out how to deal with the British and what to do about it. So the 5th meeting was May 24th, and that's when they were joined by Canajoharie, German Flats, Kingsland, at William Sieber's house. They always put, it's nice, they always put where they are meeting. So the 5th meeting, these are the guys that showed up. So you got a lot of Palatine guys who have been elected to their committee. And there's Christopher P. Yates. I don't think I meant to put Christo. Maybe it edited it for me because it didn't have enough room. Anyway, so you got these guys. So there's the first 4 guys, and then these other guys who were elected to the Palatine District. You got the Canajoharie District, Herkimer, Cox, Sieber, John Moore. Do you know why his name is in red? I know. I'm probably asking questions that are too hard. He's just one of my favorite people. He's from Cherry Valley. And John Pickert. Are any of you guys descendants of these guys? I'm sure there's got to be at least a few of you who are descendants of these people, but you may just not know it. I'm friends with a guy on Facebook who lives out in Ohio who's descended from John Pickard. And we always say, hey, our ancestors knew each other. And then you got German Flats, William Petrie or Petrie. How do you guys say it? Do you say Petrie? So there was a lot of Petries on that committee. It was a big family. And William Petrie, he was the doctor at Oriskany who was wounded. I think he was the chief doctor or chief surgeon with the Tryon County militia. And then you got Kingsland, George Wentz. I kept thinking, George Wentz, I know that name. Cheers. Yeah, he was Norm on Cheers. He's following the nation. So this must have been his ancestor. Okay, so there's the first 4 districts that got involved and the guys who were on the committee. We're still talking about the 5th meeting. This is a big meeting. So Mr. Wall from German Flats, so this is one of the things that I realized, oh, there's minutes and stuff that aren't here. They were lost. They weren't collected with the rest of the stuff. He talks about the proceedings of the German Flats and Kingsland districts, and with a speech delivered to the Oneidas. And I'm like, oh, we don't have a record of this stuff. He then, let's see. Yeah, okay. So you know who this guy is? Well, of course, his name is right there. But did you know who he was before? Guy Johnson. Do you know him? Kind of a haughty dude. Look at the way that he is painted with the Indian in the shadow looking at him, and he's got all this finery on that he probably never really wore. He just got dressed up for the picture. So in May of '75, Johnson flees the Mohawk Valley because he had become the superintendent of Indian Affairs from William Johnson. He was William Johnson's nephew and son-in-law. Try to figure that out. And then he was up in Oswego rallying the Indians until at least July. So Guy Park Manor on Route 5, as you go into Amsterdam, got really badly flooded and partially destroyed, and they're fixing it up now. That was his house. So New York Provincial Congress. I don't know if I know some of you guys must do research. And it's the most rewarding thing in the world, because not only do you get to find the stuff you're looking for, but you get to find stuff you're not looking for, and it's just as cool. So that's how I found this document. So I'm just looking up stuff, and all of a sudden I see this document. I'm like, I haven't seen this before, and come to find out, this is everybody who was at the New York Provincial Congress, all the guys from the counties of New York who were meeting there. And up here you have Christopher P. Yates and John Marlatt. He was from the Mohawk District. So those were the 2 guys that went to the New York Provincial Congress from up here. This is in the Onondaga County, Onondaga Historical Society. So it was somehow, it should have been burned up in the state fire, in the state library or archives fire in 1911. But apparently someone had removed it from the collection, so it was saved, and then later it ended up being sold to somebody who sold it to somebody who gave it to them. So the 6th meeting, the Mohawk District guys show up. Now, according to the records, the Mohawk District guys hadn't shown up at first because of the Johnsons, who were always watching to see if any rebels were up to mischief. So now that William Johnson has died and Guy Johnson has fled the scene, it's safer for them to show up. So this is the Mohawk District. So, oh, sorry, that's Palatine. So at the sixth meeting, they say, is expected that no person or persons shall from this day have any dealings with or other connections in the way of trade with any person or persons whatsoever who have not signed the association entered into. So the association isn't explained in any of the minutes. And apparently what it was is that when these guys started to organize, they would ask everybody in their district to sign the association, meaning we're going to support Boston, we're going to resist the British, we're going to do this and that. And of course, if you didn't sign the association, then now you're labeled as a loyalist. So, and I don't know that there's any association documents left, like extant. I've never seen one from this time period. All these guys who were being rebellious, they all signed association documents saying, yes, I will support this cause. So anyway, seventh meeting, 43 delegates now, from 4 to 43, including my ancestor. He showed up for the second meeting. Now, the Mohawk District guys were probably meeting in secret, but we don't have their minutes. We don't have any documents on them. And it was at the house of Werner Tigert. So this is the first full meeting of the Tryon County Committee of Safety. So these are the guys that were there that day, June 2nd, 75. So you can see the list had grown quite a bit from just the original 4. Jacob Clark is going to become an important guy in this story. A lot of these guys are. There's the Mohawk District guys. See, there's John Marlatt, who had been sent to the New York Provincial Congress. John Bliven. So these guys either lived in the Johnstown area or in the town of Florida, which is that little triangular area south of the Mohawk where the Schoharie Creek comes into it. That little triangle, that's now called the town of Florida, unfortunately. What a stupid name, Florida. What does it have to do with anything? It's like, where's the town of Florida? I have never heard of it. Anyway, and by the way, it was very rural then. It's still very rural. There's 2 little tiny towns. There's not much there. But in these days, these guys wanted a lot of land. They didn't want to live in a village or a town. They wanted to have 100 or 200 acres. And, they knew their neighbors, but, they had to go visit them. They didn't see them. They didn't look out the window and saw Joe Schmidt, fixing his car across the street. So the Mohawk District is this little triangle here. I'm sorry, this is the Mohawk District. That's the town of Florida. So it included Fort Johnson, Fort Hunter, the Lower Mohawk Castle, where the Mohawks lived, which is actually over here on this side, not that side. Johnstown, Canajoharie, which became Fonda. So there's the guys that Frederick Fisher became Colonel Fisher of this regiment. So what these guys ended up doing was they ended up making up a regiment of militia for each district. So you had the Mohawk District Regiment, the Palatine District Regiment, Canajoharie District Regiment. Do you know this place, this pothole in the creek? Have you ever been there? It's really a nice place to visit. Scott and I went there a couple years ago.
Island by the Moss Island?
No, this is in Canajoharie. It's in Canajoharie Creek. And this is Canajoharie. Canajoharie is named after this geological feature. Isn't that neat? The pot that washes itself. That's what Canajoharie means, according to Joseph Brandt. So the water comes down, and I don't know how long it took to carve this thing out, but it's like 15 feet wide and 10 feet deep. So And there's other little ones nearby there, like some are maybe this big and some are maybe this big. So the water comes down and it carries little stones, and the stones swirl around and they dig out the limestone, and eventually they create little holes or a big hole like this. And so it's called the pot that washes itself, because the water comes down, it swirls around, and it goes out. Yeah. So Canajoharie members, Nicholas Herkimer, you've all heard of him. Ebenezer Cox, the big mouth that got everybody in trouble a couple of times. These are the Cherry Valley guys in the middle. And German Flats, the guys who were on that committee, which is this whole section here. And Kingsland District guys. Okay, so John Johnson is the son of William Johnson, and he's now like the big shot royalist of the Mohawk Valley. So they wrote him several letters because they wanted to test him to see what he would do, because he was essentially arming himself and his neighbors in case he was attacked. He had lived in Old Fort Johnson, the stone house, and then he had moved up to Johnson Hall when his father died. So they request, these guys must have got a kick out of this. They request if they could go to the Indian councils. Yeah, I'm sure he was pleased with that. Because of course, he's trying to control the Indians and make sure that they stayed loyal to the British, just as Guy Johnson was. June 3rd meeting is missing because it's referred to in the minutes, but there's no record of it. Okay, so the 8th meeting, June 4th, also at Tygert's house, that 3 persons form a committee to attend the Congress with the Indians and bring an interpreter. These guys were having meetings with the Indians, like they didn't go through like proper channels. Like there were Indian commissioners in Albany, but they didn't want to deal with the Indian commissioners. They wanted to deal with the Indians like face to face, one-on-one, or us and them. So, and also it says in this meeting, as a necessary measure that the subscribers of our association buy themselves into companies and appoint officers. So this is the beginning of the formation of the militia. They got to have some. They got to have some power. They got to have some teeth. Otherwise, just having some meetings and stuff, what difference is that going to make? So the 9th meeting is at the Van Alstyne homestead, and that's what this is. And this is what it says. We resolve that Christopher P. Yates and John Marlatt be appointed to attend the Provincial Congress upon the very alarming, calamitous situation. Herkimer becomes the chair because Christopher P. Yates had been the chair up until then. So the calamitous and alarming events and situations. So what were those things? So this is June of '75. So I know almost all of you know one of the events that had happened before this. So what happened in the northern colonies in '75 that really started the war? What happened?
Lexington and Concord.
What?
Lexington and Concord.
Yes. Which was when? Do you know the date? April 19th, '75. Yes. So you have Lexington and Concord, and you have the Siege of Boston. I had known about the Siege of Boston, but I never really looked at it that closely. And doing this research, I discovered, it happened the same day as Lexington and Concord, because the militia who had showed up to fight the British, because the British are shooting at us now and we're shooting at them, they just followed the British back to Boston and laid siege to Boston. So that's the day the Boston siege started, which I had never really realized before. So the 10th meeting Canajoharie district. They're now raising the militia, choosing officers, that kind of thing. And now in the British Army, the officers who were wealthy, they would buy a commission to become an officer. That's how they did it. They just bought their commissions. In America, the militiamen chose their officers. So that's what was happening. And you see, it says agreeable to the regulations of the provincial Congress. So they're not just making stuff up. They're going by what the provincial Congress is telling them to do. So Palatine meeting at Jacob Clock's house, which is now Fort Clock, I believe. And that's a place to visit too on Route 5 near St. Johnsville. So they're raising a militia. So this is June of '75. Committee of German Flats and Kingsland. For some reason, they always met together. And so it always puts them together. So they were a little slow in choosing officers and forming companies because there was more loyalists up there who would refuse to sign, and then maybe they would sign regretting, begrudgingly. And so they were figuring out some of the people who was really on their side. And Edward Wall, this guy who I had mentioned before, he said, well, you know what, guys, I'm not into this anymore. And they allowed him to resign. They allowed him to get off the committee. And I thought, well, who was Edward Wall? I never really heard anything about him before. So I looked him up. He was married to one of the Butlers. He was married to John Butler's niece. And of course, the Butlers were bred in the bone loyalists and very aligned with the Johnsons. So he got off the committee. Battle of Bunker Hill. So this is the meeting that these guys had same day as the Battle of Bunker Hill, which Scott and I went to see a couple years ago. It was really, really a neat trip. So then you have Washington showing up because you got all these militia, all these guys who were, in the siege of Boston. The Continental Congress appoints Washington to lead the army. So he was appointed on June 15th, but it took him a while to get there because he rode his horse up there, I guess. And this is kind of funny. Washington takes a look at the troops, especially the New England troops he was kind of disgusted with. He says, they're exceeding dirty and nasty people. Probably meaning they didn't bathe that often. I don't think they were nasty people like in their personalities. So have you heard of Generalissimo Francisco Franco? Those of you who are like my age, you remember him from World War II and all that stuff in Spain. Generalissimo. Have you heard of His Excellency George Washington? Generalissimo? This is one of the funniest things I found in the whole time I was doing this research. It says right in one of the letters, one of the provincial Congress letters to Washington, he's generalissimo of all the forces and forces raised and to be raised. I thought that was pretty funny. Okay, so we're at the end of June '75, and the native folks who live up in the valley, like the German Flats area, these guys are now starting to have more talks with the white settlers and the native folks. So you probably know this stuff, right, Susan? By the way, this is Susan Brewer. She's a historian too. I think you've given a talk here. She is a specialist on the Oneidas. So it's an extraordinary meeting. Whoever's writing the minutes, it's an extraordinary meeting. The sachems and warriors of the Oneida and Tuscaroras, and they're given several speeches confirming peace and true friendship as brothers, and promised their zealous endeavor to unite they're brothers of the Six Nations. Well, you know, that didn't work out too well. So then, this is maybe my favorite minutes of the whole thing. They're joined by 2 members of the Schenectady Committee and 4 members of the Albany Committee, because they know this is a really important meeting. And it says, the sachems and warriors recommended that we should not neglect to shut the gate at Fort Stanwix. I thought, what? What does that mean? Not neglect to shut the gate at Fort Stanwix. And I thought I knew what it meant, but I thought, I'm not sure if I know what it means. But, you know, especially back then, maybe still, Native people talk in metaphors a lot of the time. They don't just give you the straight scoop. They talk in kind of like flowery language, and they embellish their talks because they're known for their diplomacy and their great speeches. So anyway, these are the guys. I looked up, I also have the minutes for the Albany and Schenectady committee, so I looked them up. I found out who those guys were. And then, so now, fast forward a year, the 3rd New Jersey finally is ordered to come up and fix Fort Stanwix, refurbish it, rebuild it, live there, stay there. So it took a year, basically, for them to not shut the gate, meaning occupy the fort and keep the gate shut. That's what they meant, as far as I know. So there's settlers living up at Fort Stanwix, not in the fort, but around the fort. And so they're starting to freak out now, and they need protection. That's an old drawing of the Van Alstyne by Rufus Grider, who some of you probably know about. So 15th meeting, July 10th, and it's just the Palatine and Canajoharie committees. At the request of the sachems and warriors of Canajoharie castles, so now they're talking to the Mohawks. Before they were talking to the Oneidas and Tuscaroras. Now they're talking to the Mohawks, who live right across the river from they're in the Canajoharie district and right across from the Palatine district. So I was thinking, well, let's see, where was Jacob Clark's house and where was the Mohawk castle? And so I'm always looking up old maps. So this, I don't have I think this is from 1769. I don't remember where this map comes from, but it shows the Indian castle right here. Here's Fort Fry, if you know where that is. Here's St. Johnsville, and Jacob Clark lived here. That's George Clark's house. I think that was his father. George Clark's house was on the right as you go into St. Johnsville going west, and that's not there anymore, but Fort Clark is still there, and I believe that was Jacob Clark's house. And then this is a nice little gem, an address from the committee interpreted by Mrs. Peggy Johnson, who was married to this guy. I don't know how to say his name. And his last name is Johnson, so I assume he's one of William Johnson's, one of his children with one of the Mohawk women he was with. So, and then they answered in a long speech. So they're really right across the river from each other. And then, of course, I had to see, well, what does Google Maps look like today compared to this 1769 map? And this wonderful bump in the river is still there. Isn't that cool? It's still there. It's a little bit changed, but the bump in the river is still there. Okay, so they're back at the Van Alstyne, and they decide they have to give everybody an oath of secrecy. Now, I think they've been keeping it a secret pretty well, but they decided we need an oath of secrecy that everyone takes, because they didn't want you to be talking to loyalists someplace and telling them what we're doing. And then a letter to the committees of Schenectady and Albany are written. And this is what it's about. So Ebenezer Cox was told by Peter Tigert that he was told by somebody else that Colonel Johnson was going to invade the Mohawk Valley with 800 or 900 Indians. This is July of '75. So this is 2 years before Oriskany. They were already hearing threats that they were going to be invaded, and that Joseph Brant and Walter Butler were going to lead them. Then Jacob Clark reports that 3 Fort Hunter Indians, now Fort Hunter Indians are the Mohawks closer to Johnstown, closer to the Loyalist orbit. He was told by one of his servants that 3 Fort Hunter Indians had come by and they all had gunpowder on the horses heading from Oswego back to Fort Hunter. So they write to Schenectady and Albany asking for some help, men and ammunition. This is another Rufus Grider drawing, a map of the Battle of Stone Arabia. And so it shows, see this big section here, that's Stone Arabia. So Ebenezer Cox at this meeting is given, I think there's the wrong word was written in the minutes. It seems to say that he's being given supervision of the companies of Palatine and Canajoharie. The Old England District. Now I know there's a couple guys here who know what this is. The guys from Sydney. Have you ever heard of the Old England District? It's kind of a cool name. That was this territory south of Cherry Valley, south of Richfield Springs, which is between the Unadilla River and the Susquehanna. That was I don't know when it was actually created, but this is now a district of Tryon County. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. That's where Sydney is, and that was more like Indian country. It was much closer to Indian country than up here. So at this meeting, Tigert gives his deposition about the Indian invasion that he's heard about, and a letter is written to the Provincial Congress recommending these guys for officers. Andrew Fink Jr.'s house is still there, by the way, in Little Falls. Little Falls is that way, right? His house is still there. 18th meeting continued. They get 300 pounds of lead from Schenectady and 150 pounds of gunpowder from Albany. So these guys are now importantly supporting each other. And 2 more members are elected for Palatine, and a letter is sent to the Provincial Congress saying, like, how do we handle this stuff? Because they were a committee to protest British actions, and now they're becoming the government of the Mohawk Valley. How do we handle stuff? What do we do? They want direction from these guys. So August 26th meeting, disobedience is to be punished by the officers by inflicting fines. So it wasn't corporal punishment. It was if you act out, if you misbehave, if you hit somebody, if you don't show up for guard duty, you're fined. And asking civil disagreements shall be settled by 3 members of the committee in the district, and officers of the committee need to be obeyed. So, still the same meeting, constables appointed who need to obey the committee, officers chosen at the first meeting of North Germantown. I've never heard of North Germantown. Apparently it was somewhere in the Palatine district. There was a little area called North Germantown, but it doesn't exist anymore, and I couldn't find out anything more about it. And these guys are chosen as officers. So Harper's Field, this is out there a little ways. Most people up here don't know where that is. John Harper and his family founded Harper's Field. It was a huge patent down in this Old England district area. The Harpers were one of the most zealous, patriotic, fighting families of all of Tryon County. They were Scots-Irish, by the way. So I jumped to document 32 because, like, I wanted to get closer to the Battle of Oriskany, and so we'll talk about that a little bit. So this guy, George Herkimer, abused one of his privates, and so he gets cashiered. I'd heard that word, but I've never really seen it written. Of course, they spelled it wrong, but he got cashiered, meaning you're no longer an officer. You can't serve as an officer anymore. Another image of the Rufus Grider's image of the Van Alstyne.
Excuse me, what town is that in, please?
Canajoharie. Yeah. It's one of the first buildings in Canajoharie. There were two settlers early on in Canajoharie. Van Alstyne was one of them. Scremling was the other guy, I think. So I'm going to show you pictures of houses. Have you been to Johnson Hall? If you haven't, you have to go see it. It is beautiful. This is where William Johnson, this was his final resting place, his final mansion. Herkimer home, you've been there. So I always thought, oh, this is interesting. He has this house built in 1763. Oh, Herkimer has his built a year later. Herkimer was the second most wealthy guy in the valley after the Johnsons. So there's a competition going. That's a close-up of the Van Alstyne with the sign that talks about how many of the meetings of the committee were held here. That guy was the president like five years ago. Okay, Herkimer's meeting with Brant. June 30th through about July 2nd. It was like several days. Didn't really go that well. It actually happened in the Johnson settlement, or very near it. It happened in this area, this whole area was called Unadilla. Although Joseph Brant called it Tonadilla, and so Herkimer refers to it as that too. So 380 militia with Herkimer, and Brant has like maybe 200 guys with him. And Herkimer is saying, you know, we don't want you to participate in this fight. We want you to stay neutral. And Joseph Brant's like, well, too bad. He had said something to Reverend Johnson like, I am a king's man. And, when Brant kicked the Johnsons out of the Johnson settlement, he said something like, you have like 5 days to leave. If you're a supporter of the king, you can stay, but otherwise you have to go. And they went to Cherry Valley. That's why my ancestors were at Cherry Valley the next year, instead of being still here in this area. So we're almost done. I know your brain is probably more than full. I found this letter recently, just looking up stuff, boom. There's this letter a week before Oriskany. It's a Herkimer letter that was sold on Sotheby's website, but they only showed the back page because they don't want to give away, the whole deal. So, July 29th, 77, and I thought, man, there might be some really juicy thing in there. It's just about he just wants to collect money for a bill. He's supplying the troops with food and stuff. And he's talking to Jealous Fonda, who is a trader, and he wants to be paid. That's the whole thing. So anyway, I don't know how much somebody paid for it, but if you're a Herkimer fan, it would be nice to have some of this stuff. So then we have the Battle of Oriskany, which you all know about, and I can't go into that very much. But I do a talk on the Battle of Oriskany, and Scott and I are like obsessed with the Battle of Oriskany. And he is from Oriskany. In fact, he was born on the battlefield. So go see him afterwards with all his stuff over there. That's Colonel Clyde, by the way, who's another one of my favorite Cherry Valley people. He was the adjutant to Herkimer. That's why we know, oh, that represents Colonel Clyde. This is from Gavin Watt and Jim Morrison's book on Oriskany, which is pretty good. And this is the line of march that they think, it went like this. The first regiment, second, the Oneidas and like committeemen, 4th regiment, 3rd regiment in the back, and the wagons were like 15 ox-drawn wagons bringing supplies to Fort Stanwix. So according to these guys, the 3rd regiment wasn't all the way in the back. They were split between the wagons. And when the attack happened, some of these guys in the 3rd Regiment, which is the Mohawk Regiment, were not in the ambush. So a lot of them ran and just tried to get away, and the Indians mostly ran them down and killed them. And so anyway, there's a lot of controversy about that. So this is a painting from the Cherry Valley Museum of Colonel Campbell, and that would be Samuel Clyde next to him, at Oriskany. It's really a beautiful painting, not well known. And then these are the guys that I was able to find who were killed, the committeemen, most of them, who were killed at Oriskany. Werner Tigert, remember they met at his house so many times? John Bliven, Ebenezer Cox, Eisenlord, Helmer, Herkimer was not killed that day, but he died of his wounds. He died of the surgery, I think, when they amputated his leg, which was, by the way, Benedict Arnold's surgeon cut off his leg. Okay, this is a fun little thing I found in the New York State Library. It's a bill. So John Fry and Frederick Bellinger are captured at Oriskany and taken to Canada. And John Butler sends them a bill for the tea and loaf sugar they had consumed in the last 3 months. So, see, this is November '77, so it's 3 months after Oriskany. I never thought that they would bill people who they were holding in prison. Anyway, this Joseph Brant portrait sold for over $5 million. This is back, I came across this and then I tracked it down. It was sold in July 2014. This is a Gilbert Stuart portrait of Brant in 1786 after the war.
Do you know who bought it?
Huh?
Do you know who bought it?
What?
Who bought it from that?
They don't tell you that. They said it was an American guy. That's all they said. There's a whole article on Sotheby's website about this. Books I recommend: Journals of Samuel Kirkland, White Savage, William Johnson, and the Invention of America, The Old New York Frontier by Halsey, Mrs. Hinman's book, Forgotten Allies. This is Jim Martin's book about the Oneidas. And read the William Johnson papers. They're really fun to read. These are 2 talks I'm giving. I'm giving this talk in Sydney in May, and then I'm giving this talk in Harpersville, which is south of Sydney on the Susquehanna, which is basically this talk plus some of the other stuff about the Loyalist guy. And Cherry Valley is having its 250th celebration in 2028, because that's the 250th of the Cherry Valley Massacre. So this is some of the stuff that we're cooking up. And I want to do a puppet show. I don't know how I'm going to do that yet, but I want to do a puppet show of the massacre. But not the bloody part of the massacre. Like behind the scenes, like what people were doing and how Brant saved these families and stuff like that. And that's it. Thank you.